amazing instrument. It has developed into an incredible voice in today's music. So many types of guitars, so many styles of playing, all sorts of gear. How does one make their voice be heard as a guitarist? My name is Jeff Floro, and welcome to All About Guitar, where we talk tone, we talk technique, we talk gear. Where we discover how we can become better musicians in a world of constantly changing technologies. Where we take a good look at everything guitar, and sometimes not exactly guitar, but just as important, so we can be more successful as a musician in today's music scene. So sit back and relax, and let's explore all about guitar. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to All About Guitar. As you can see, we have a full house tonight. I'm really excited about the show because it's a real hardcore gear show with some of my hardcore friends. And we're going to take a look today at Line 6. My guest right next to me here, Eric Klein from Line 6, is here to talk about this pedal that it came out within about a year ago, right? Or is it?
It was October of last year.
October last. So it's fairly new, called the HX Stomp. I've had several other guests that have been on the show that been talking about the Helix, that have used the Helix a lot. In fact, one of JP's co-guitarist, Jim Stubblefield, was using a Helix too. But they've been raving about this HX Stomp, and JP had called me up and said, you gotta look at this, dude. It's just incredible. So let me get the introductions out so everybody knows everybody here hanging out with us. And he brought his Kemper, and we're going to take a look at the differences between the Kemper and the Line 6. Jeffrey Marshall, who's been on before, and he's in Bleeding Heart, but we've had him on, and amazing guitar player. And I don't know where that exotic Strat is, but I want it. But anyway, so welcome, JP. I've known for years, and from Incendio and Pierre Durand, and welcome. Thank you for putting this together, because he basically did. We got some interesting stuff to show you. Also hanging with us tonight, Andrea Lisa. You saw her a couple of weeks ago. She's here, and she was digging the guitars. She was playing the guitars before the show, and hidden off camera. You can't see him. He's in the corner, but here he can stare.
You can feel him.
You can feel him. Is Doug Moore, who's come by. He's been a big blessing helping me with stuff, and a bass player. And I want to mention just briefly a little bit too, because he was interested in the fact there's a lot of amp models in there that for bassists.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
So we want to talk about that. Now, so that's basically what's going on. Before we start talking about this, can you lift this pedal board up a little bit so you can see the actual HX Stomp? And JP has it put on his pedal board, and I want him to explain a little bit how he has this set up, because this is his live setup now that he uses for Incendio for both, and he has both his acoustic and electric guitars here. So JP, tell us a little bit what you're doing and why is it patched that way?
So the backstory is I'm going to give a shout out to both Jim Stubblefield and other guys, Eric Hansen and Dan Sistos. Even Luis Villegas has played a little bit with this. We're a lot of us play Spanish guitar professionally, more on the rumba flamenco side. And it's always a struggle to get a great tone, find a good pickup combination, find a preamp. We've used other great products in the past. But I was up to the point where I was just taking tons of stuff to gigs, like too much. And wanted to find something compact, and everybody had been talking about the Helix a lot. And then this came out, and it's like, okay, this is a pretty powerful unit. Now, I guess just to jump ahead and why I'm doing this, the Helix has, the HX Stomp has the opportunity to put in different inputs to have a one guitar going in one place and another guitar going in through the send return, the low impedance input. The reason I'm not using that is because the HX Stomp, like other units, it takes a little while for the tuner to turn on, which is just fine. That's the way Jim uses it. But in my case, I do a lot of guitar synthesis as well. So I needed something where the tuner would come just right off. You know, I couldn't keep my foot on this and then jump over to turn that on. So I have that. As a result, I also have a channel selector to go through it. Pretty minor additions to stuff that if you were not using it in the complicated mode as I am, you would be fine to use this as standalone. And Jim has been using it standalone in shows, and it's an
So
amazing.
he's
guitar
using
plugin.
it without the preamps and all the other stuff.
Yeah, he and Dan Sistos kind of been commiserating on how to use these units as cleanly and small as possible in the same context we are, which is like we want to incorporate more electric guitar. So Dan and Jim both, they come in, they use a pickup and a sensor, like almost a mic. They use the two inputs here on the side, and then the electric guitar comes in here, and that's how they've been utilizing the unit, and it's been a home run so far for both of them, from what I understand.
Very cool. So, well, let's talk a little bit about the whole Helix line. And Eric, what I want you to talk about, because I was looking online, and it was difficult to see. There are comparisons of what, like the Helix with the LT, and the Helix or the HX, and the HX Stomp. I just want to get a broad overview of what you see, the differences of the different units, and then what you would recommend in terms of why you'd want the HX. Like, okay, we get an idea of why he wants the HX Stomp over the main Helix. It's a lot smaller and compact. The Helix is it's bigger than that pedal board.
Helix is big,
Yeah. So, but let's go through a little bit of the features of the different ones, so we get an idea of all of what Line 6 is offering. So, and they can see what the differences are, processing power, the whole shot.
Sure. So Helix is the flagship floor modeler. It came out first. It was June of 2015. Just a couple months later, it was followed by Helix Rack, which is a 3-rack unit version with a floorboard called Helix Control. Sonically, conceptually, I/O, they're virtually identical. Just depends on whether you want an all-in-one solution or if you want a rack over, off stage or behind you or in a studio with a remote control, which is what I use in my studio, where I have Helix in a rack in my studio desk, and then I have the Helix Control actually sitting on a keyboard, and I can use the CapSense switches to jump and edit things without having to go over to my rack. So I use it like a tactile control along with the software editor. And the rack has a couple extra inputs in the back. Other than that, they're identical. We knew $1,500 was going to be a tough nut to crack for a lot of musicians, and we knew we wanted to do a less expensive version as well, but we wanted to make sure Helix was resonating with people before we decided, well, let's just flood the market with more products. So as soon as we knew, okay, wow, this Helix thing is a much bigger hit than we anticipated, let's all, full speed on Helix LT, which is virtually identical as well. It doesn't have the little scribble strip displays above every foot switch. It's bent sheet metal as opposed to extruded aluminum, which is very expensive. It doesn't have quite as many ins and outs in the back, but sonically they're exactly the same. Processing power, they're exactly the same. But it's 2/3 the price, so it's $990, so it's $1,000. And we understood that the presets, because everybody's going to have a different Helix, they're going to have a Helix floor or a rack or an LT. We wanted people to be able to share those presets back and forth, but a lot of us come from the studio where we don't want to have things plugged in all the time, so we have the software called Helix Native, which is a VST audio unit and AAX plugin that can work in your recording software, Pro Tools, Logic, Cubase, any of these, and it's a full Helix engine that runs in your computer. And we do crazy discounts. If you happen to be a member if you happen to own any Helix product, you get the plugin super cheap, that sort of thing.
What's the plugin list for?
The plugin is $399 by itself.
It's cheap.
If you happen to own any of the Helix hardware products, it's $99. Because the presets can go back and forth however you want.
That's the best thing I've heard all day.
I'll get you
Oh
guys.
my gosh.
I'll get you an NFR.
Oh, thank you. Because we know a guitar rig user and bias. We used a bunch of them, the waves. So this, been so busy with this, I didn't even know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, so I don't actually use. I mean, I have Helix rack in my studio, and I use it as a front end for my guitar because the buffer and the impedance circuit and all of that sounds great.
correct,
Just for
yes.
record, it's proper. So it with the Helix native plugin is the ideal signal path that we've designed it for. But I use the plugin. That's what I use 99% of the time because I can run 20 of them on my 2010 Mac Pro. So I can run them on drum buses and vocal tracks and keyboard tracks and the 8 guitar things that are stacked on top of each other and bass and that sort of thing. So the advantage of the plugin is you don't have to have the hardware hooked up all the time. And even though Helix and HX Stomp allow you to route your signal from your computer through the hardware and back in over USB, we call that reamping, if you're familiar with that terminal. It's a pain because it happens in real time. So if you have 8 guitar tracks, you're like, oh, I wish I had a little bit more gain on the Mesa model. Let me turn it up. Okay, now I have to track it all the way through it and wait my 4-minute song. All right, go back. Let's do the next track. And it takes you all day just to reamp all of your guitar tracks. Now it's you open up the plugin, turn a knob, done. Because the DSP is then in your computer. So that's the advantage there.
Yeah, the other cool thing I think would be you can sit there in your studio with the software and tweak it, and then you can just dump those patches into your box.
Yep.
And then
Absolutely. That's a huge deal because when you're on the road and you're writing songs and you're in the tour bus or you're in the van or you're in a hotel room or you're in somebody's den that you're crashing in and you're writing a song, like that's really cool. Everybody brings their laptops with them now. So, and they're always recording songs on the road, and as soon as they get back from the road, they hit the studio. And then what normally happens, you get into the studio, and now you have to rebuild and try to figure out how you did all of those sounds when you were practicing them at sound check. Now you don't do anything. You're like, oh, well, I made the sounds in the hardware. Now I just load them straight into the plugin, and they magically appear, and they're ready for the record. So then when you're tweaking them for the record and you're fixing them in the mix and you're getting those tones perfect in the plugin, then when you're ready to go on tour for that record, you just port them right over.
yeah.
So, I mean, this is LA, and there are people who will spend thousands of dollars and weeks hiring guitar techs to go in and say, please figure out how to get these tones that we made on our record with all these boutique pedals and 8 million amps. How do we get this to translate live? And they'll go, okay, well, we'll figure it out, and I'll build you a pedal board, and I'll get this modeler, and I'll do all this sort of stuff. And now that process is now 30 seconds long.
There's something I have to mention in pursuant to all this. 'Cause I'm going to jump ahead, but we're going to come back. Part of the thing I love, and I jumping ahead. There's so many features that I think for you guys are no-brainer that are so obvious and important, and the way the architecture reflects them here, the onboard gate and setting that, and that it's a block that doesn't take up some of your DSP, or is already kind of it's not one of the 6 blocks that you can use. Something else that you mentioned, there are all these little the impedance, the auto impedance matching, and then the that you can select it on the main channel. All the things we'll come back to a little bit. It's just a little tip of the iceberg to express to you all how much power is even in just this HX Stomp to be able to do super important, cool stuff.
That
The impedance
what you're
matching was
saying.
like,
Well, it's obvious that the ergonomics of the device, and just reading the last couple of days, just going online, looking at the manuals, it's designed logically. It's not something that's just some guy, it's his idea. It's designed specifically to be user friendly, and that is to me, and the way you have it set up with the software, the editor, all of the different people. We'll take a look at the editor in a little bit. It's really it's effective because musicians don't have the time. They're on the road, they're playing, as you said. They want to get that sound fast, and there are times when they'll sit and tweak, but for the most part, and especially live, you got to be able to get a certain sound. And JP was telling me how he was developing what he needed for his show, and I think that's important. Now, does the HX Stomp have the same DSP power as the Helix, or is it scaled down?
It has half.
Half,
So
okay.
so Helix Rack, and Helix LT have two analog device Shark DSPs built in, and then they have two MCUs that kind of shuttle around and take care of graphics and take care of audio routing, USB audio, that sort of thing. HX Stomp and HX Effects, which are the pedal board versions, have half that, so they have one Shark DSP. But sonically, the models, the effects, the amps, aside from HX Effects, which doesn't have amp models by design, they're virtually identical. In fact, that was the number one goal for HX Stomp was it must sound exactly the same as if somebody made a 6-block preset in Helix. So if it sounds exactly the same, we did A/B tests and null tests with reversing the phase on one to make sure that every single model is exactly the same, which means we needed the same op amps, same A to D converters, same clocking, that sort of stuff. But then trying to fit that into something the size of what it's in.
That's pretty small.
Yeah, it was 4 months of doing nothing but making it smaller. And then we would run through the tests and like, nope, there's a little bit more noise than the big guy. They're like, yeah, but it's $600. It's way cheaper. It's like, doesn't matter. Still has to sound exactly the same. And they went in and they started tweaking things. Then it got too big. I'm like, nope, it's got to get back smaller. So the team worked really, really hard, and now it's on pedal boards. That was the big thing too. So I've been a modeler guy since '99. So I mean, I've been in the box using amp modeling software as my primary source for my own
Like
productions.
Amp Farm, that
Amp
kind of
Farm,
stuff?
exactly. So I was Amp Farm '99. That's when I got into it, and I had a rack mount pod, and I just got rid of it because I was just using the software. Like, this is great. So it comes naturally to me. So when I'm playing guitar, I'm hearing guitar through studio monitors, and that totally makes sense to me. So it was a natural progression. It's like, I know how modelers work. Let's make really great modelers. The problem is that modeler guys, people who embrace amp modelers and effects modelers, are a very small portion of the market. We're very weird and tweaky, and we argue online, and we have debates, and none of it matters if we're only talking to 10-15% of guitarists.
I've seen some of that. Y'all are crazy.
Yeah, weird. Yeah. So HX Effects and HX Stomp were really designed specifically to scratch the itch of amp and pedal board players, because we don't want people to get rid of their amps. We don't want people to get rid of their pedal boards. We want to be a part of that world. We want to enhance it.
Yeah.
And I have my favorite amps that I still keep, that I still track on occasion because it's fun, because it's a different experience. And I have my favorite pedals that I plug into, and I don't want to lose that experience, but I don't want to have to switch my brain from modeling mode to amp and pedal board mode either, and I wouldn't expect our customers to do that.
But it's interesting how it changed. Like, for example, Jeffrey, you've been touring on and off with Alan Parsons, and he's bringing his little lunchbox Kemper, and because he can't take big amps, the budget isn't there anymore. He has to give backline, or at least in his case, just speakers, which is easier. You just get a 4x12 and you're good to go.
Yeah, I honestly don't even really need it technically, because we're doing all ears. I just feel comfortable having it in case I'm not in the mix or whatever.
So they don't even mic anything on stage.
No, I have. It is running through a cabinet. It's real low. Like, you can't even hardly hear it. But it's just there for me to be able to go, okay, I'm not digging this mix, so I want to just rock my cabinet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's more of just peace of mind, which I have yet to do.
So that's a new reality.
Yeah.
That's a whole, and that's their main gig. He doesn't have the option to have amps, and he has to have a small setup that he can fly with, that he can put up in a overhead, and still be able to get all the things. And Incendio's music's complex. It's not easy it's got a lot of sounds.
I would say, I did some research beforehand. As I said, my friends were already familiar with the unit, and Jeffrey has done some shows with Pierre Durand and with something for Jim with Incendio where he used the Kemper. So I was familiar with somebody using both. And so the idea was like, what can this do? And before I bought it, everybody was talking about the 6 blocks. And it is really funny to listen to guitarists online talk about this stuff. Because basically the bottom line is 6 blocks, that's not enough. Can't there be more DSP power? And then people are very patiently explaining, if that's not enough, get the Helix. You know, it's a kind of an obvious thing. If you are a person that is used to doing your cab in stereo, and we're going to put this speaker on this side and run the chorus over here, and we're going to maybe take an Eventide harmonizer and take it off a couple, and you totally, then you're going to look at a Helix. That's got the processing power. Jeff will understand, and I feel you're maybe a little bit this way too. It's about the amp. It's about the amp, and it's about the speaker, and Jeffrey as well. It's like if you can't get that fundamental thing right, it's not going to work. And for me, I'm used to Mesa Boogie or Marshall or something like that. That fundamental block has got to work. So how does this work with the amp cab combination or with the amp and an IR and virtually nothing in front of it? I want to hear what this thing can do purely as
Right.
for hard rock tones. And that is where it shines in many places, but it has to do that. And I was like, wow, it does it. Now you add the functionality of having the studio preamp, which very smart, but it's like makes sense, right? If you're going to run an acoustic instrument through it, you're getting into game-changing time, because this is the size of what 2.5 Boss tuners.
Yeah.
You
2
know,
to 3.
I've got an electric and an acoustic rig right here, and I'm just running the extra stuff just because I have to control the synthesizer, you know, and I need this. Otherwise, you're just talking about this, and it is independent. You know, touring bands and all that kind of stuff. It costs money to be on the road, and I could pay for a card and amp. I could pay to do all those things, or I could keep it smaller and dedicate that money to put on a good show, or gas to make it to the next place, or a decent hotel so we all get a good night's sleep. All those things factor in, and this helps. The
Yeah,
HX
yeah.
Stomp
Well,
helps.
and it's fast.
That's
You can
the
set it
button.
up. Boom. It's backed up. You can just load it right there from your laptop. It's all set up. It's a good design. Now let's go ahead and play. Now you have your acoustic guitar. Let's take a look at your setup. Now he's got it basically like a 2-channel mono setup. So this is. Let me get all the guitars on. So he's basically now using the acoustic. So explain your signal chain.
So I've got a Maldonado guitar here with an RMC pickup with LR Baggs pull pieces. It's a sound I really like. It's a little bit more of the body. And so that's been a sound that I'm used to hearing, trying to reproduce. I don't use the sensor like Jim does, which is like a little microphone thing. So I'm just mono going in. And when I went here to this, I started with the Studio Tube Pre, which for anybody running acoustic guitars to this thing, unless you're going to process it, put it through an amp, whatever, if you want a clean signal path, this is the place to start, right? Studio, right?
You could bypass it completely. That's a model of a Requisite Y7, which has
Yes.
a little bit of grit to it, and it's
And that's the other thing is like you can go for natural sound, but like what we've been doing for ages, this acoustic is not a natural sound. Any piezo is not a natural sound. You're going to need something that is really nice, but cuts through the mix a little bit. And so that's why this seems to work so well in comparison to what I used to use. So then I've got a little gain action here for the solo. I've got a vintage digital delay. And one thing I picked up from Jim and Dan Sistos is to run 2 reverbs. Ganymede and Glitz are on here. Pulled back a little bit. They're both not huge, but they seem to work complementarily. And so that's kind of important. And we're going into one input, but all of the acoustic, so I'm only running mono. I run all the mono stuff out of left side, all the mono acoustic, and all the mono electric out of right. And so then I have a sound I'm really happy with. It's 2 channels. It's easy. You just give it to the guy and you're done.
Yeah.
Which is super important when you get somewhere. 2 channels.
Yeah,
you're
he
done.
needs to be. You can set up fast. It's really.
Yeah.
It's
So-
really quick. So go ahead and
so-
play a little bit.
And so that's with the and then I usually I'll tend to do a little rhythm. Then I set something up here to go over to, instead of having delay, I have sounds. So those are my two basic acoustic sounds, both with, the gain on them. So when I need your solo and go. So that's my bank for live. It could certainly be expanded from here as we do other songs.
How many blocks are you using?
On I'm using, I think 6 on both of them. Let me see. Yeah, 6 on both. In the main one, it is the Studio Pre, the jump in the gain for the lead, the vintage digital reverb, the Ganymede Glitz, and then a parametric EQ to do some different cutoffs and some different things. So usually we're rolling off everything under about 100 and 140, and you think, wow, that's pretty extreme. But the Spanish guitar doesn't, through a pickup, won't have that much there, and it will tend to feedback. And if you want just a good standardized sound, sometimes I do a little bump.
Yeah, you remember he's putting it through a sound system, and he's got a cut, and it's loud. It's louder than like a classical concert or something like that.
The rest of it is relatively flat. With the electrics, will roll off quite a bit more, and that's something you, Jeffrey, had
Go ahead
mentioned to me.
and pull out the electric. Let's take a look at that. And while he's talking about that, now Jeffrey brought his Kemper. What I wanted you, Eric, to explain is the difference. There is a difference in how they're making their sounds, and you were explaining a little bit before the show. How is the Kemper sound that you were explaining a little bit how Kemper makes how they do their modeling as opposed to Line 6?
Well, it's not technically modeling at all. It's what they call profiling, which is a different type of technology where they'll take a sonic snapshot of a static of an amp and cab combination at a certain setting, and then you can save that as a profile. And it's almost like if anybody's familiar with samplers versus synthesizers, it's like a sample of a Moog, but it's a really great Moog, and you may never have actually played that Moog or seen one in your life, but you can now download a sample of it. Versus what modeling does is we go in and mathematically replicate every tiny component in that amp, so then the end result is you can turn the knob and it behaves exactly like that amp at every setting, but you're stuck with that particular amp. You can't have your buddy shoot his amp and make a model of it and send it and have it work in Helix, because it's not a sample of that amp. It's about 4 man weeks to go in and measure stuff and getting everything in and doing critical listening tests and that sort of stuff.
Well, the interesting thing, and I'm going to need you to answer this, but I'm going to ask this of Jeff because you've been working with the Kemper a lot. You get a model of or a sample, I can call it that. Let's say I have a blackface twin reverb, and when we had Kemper on before, and we actually did a sample of one of my Fender amps, and it was pretty close. But we did it, and it was basically a clean sound. What amazed me with the Kemper is when you turned it up, it dirtied up like the amp. How does that? I don't understand how they could do that.
So I'm probably doing Kemper a disservice by saying sample, but it is really, really remarkable
It's an
technology.
analogy.
It's really remarkable technology. It's just very different from the way Fractal and Roland and Line 6 have done.
But how, in your case where you're modeling it, how do you, because there's a big difference between, like, let's just use the example of a Fender Twin. A Fender Twin Clean and a Fender Twin Dirty are they're big. It's a big sound. I mean, even Marshall can be, its clean sounds a little different, though it has a certain type of texture that seems a little more consistent. But I noticed, like, you get that glassy Eric Johnson type of sound, and then you get this fully blown dirt sound, How does that work? I mean, what do you do? It's amazing. I'm not asking you specifically.
So during the profiling process, when you're creating a Kemper profile, you have the amp in the room with you. So you have the cabinet with the real wood and the real drivers. So when you do that A/B listening test, you're A/Bing it against the actual playback system. Whereas when you listen to a model out of context, you're hearing it through headphones, or you're hearing it through a plastic PA speaker or studio monitors. So the experience is very, very different. So in our studio, and we will bring in engineers because we want to make sure we're constantly checking ourselves, and we'll bring in these guitar recording gurus and we'll say, hey, how does this sound? Like, I don't know if you're familiar with Dan Bull from 65 Amps.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
He's one of the world's renowned experts on AC30 circuits, and he builds them. And he could write a book on. I think he has written a book on AC30s. But so he'll come in and he'll go, yeah, that's dead on, or hey, let's go in and tweak a couple coefficients, and it'll be completely dead on because we're using the exact same playback system and the exact same speakers, and we're just A/Bing between the real preamp and the modeled preamp. So with the proper context, they're both dead on. It's hard to plug in a pair of headphones and say, yeah, it doesn't sound like a tweed, because it doesn't, because half of the feel and half of the behavior you get is from the actual cabinet, which you can't get with headphones with any type of technology, because that's just physics.
Well, when you're moving air, especially when
Exactly.
you're using multiple mics, there's physics involved.
Absolutely.
It's physics. You're moving air. Well, let's go ahead and take a listen to the electric guitar, and then we'll have Jeffrey come on and we'll compare with the Kemper, because they're pretty amazing. Both of them are pretty amazing.
So this is something I had set up for the Les Paul. I'm using it with single coils right now, but this is California. This is am I allowed to say that? Boogie.
Yeah, it's a boogie.
Type Cali 4 lead without the delay on. Here's the back. Little. So that's that Les Paul sound.
Okay.
And I have a couple of other things to play for you, but I thought it would be kind of cool for him.
Well, you have the Les Paul setting. When you guys were warming up, it was go ahead and play your setting here. Now this is the Kemper, and you'll hear it a little bit on the right side. Now, what amp are you using on
That's
that?
a Morgan.
Oh, it's a Morgan.
Oh, so
Okay.
it's like an AC30.
I did want to mention that we did not have the time. I want to take the time to set up. He also uses a train wreck from time to time, and there's a derailed Ingrid on here that I love, and we just didn't have the time to set them up so that we could A/B them. But based on what we've heard as we were jamming before, there's real parity, which is particularly interesting given that they are really two different systems.
Well, they're two different systems.
Different approaches.
But what you're going to find is like two of the same amp within a couple serial numbers of each other a lot of times sound radically different depending on
particularly train wrecks. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's impossible to actually nail two different models, and when we go in, we have a temperature controlled room that we keep our amps in, and we'll pull them out and I'm like, oh yeah, we have to have somebody take a look at this again because it's been in there for the last 2 years. Yep, let's go and fix it up. And yeah.
Now, there's an interesting thing I'm just going to take just a minute because this I did try to set up. I tried to set it very quickly, but there had been all this talk about there's talk about IRs, impulse responses, which are speaker counts, and there's also a lot of talk online because people are talking online. Well, I just want to use the amp and the cab combination, which takes up one block. Very important thing to know about this: that if you want to conserve blocks, you're probably going to go with an amp and cab combination, so you have more slots for chorus and modulations, delays, those kind of things. If you are somebody like me, or what is all of us in here, that you've kind of heard IRs might make a difference. It can
IRs are a much wider variety of cabs. So, going back to the sampler analogy, if you buy a sampler that happens to have 1,000 really good sounds in it, but you're really hardcore about trumpet samples, you're going to go and you're going to download or buy the ultimate trumpet library. And so that's why IRs are generally considered better, mainly because of quantity, because you can pick exactly the amp and vendor and mic and combination of whatever you want, which is again why we included IRs, because it's a lot of ridiculous flexibility at that point.
Yeah, it is. And to that end, another interesting thing that a lot of people said online, because that's where you go to kind of do your research, is that, yeah, man, I put the LA Studio compressor on the end of every chain just to kind of smooth things out. I love Stevie Ray Vaughan and a couple of, I don't like compression. I don't even like it on acoustic guitars. I like it mixing and stuff, but for an amp, I love Adrian Belew. I don't sound like and don't want to sound like Adrian Belew. That to me is a very strong compressed signal. So what I did was like, I love Stevie Ray. That's a bunch of amps, but if you go back earlier, it's like super reverb, it's twin. How do you get that? So this is as close as I can get now. What I did was I set up 3 instances of I believe it's a Vibro. Let me see what it was. A US double vibe. What is that? That's the
a Fender.
It's a
Fender Twin.
the Fender Twin. Okay.
The
Fender-
Vibe channel.
And the interesting thing too is people like really blown out tones or metal tones or whatever. I like, in addition to the other things, I like bluesy tones, like middle tones, like Buddy Guy, like early Buddy Guy, that kind of stuff, where it's just like an amp going through. And that's not people's cup of tea, but I did find some interesting differences going between this. So this is that same thing, just the amp and the cab for of the standard HX Stomp. Really cool, really nice. Here is the same amp with an Ownhammer CTS. It's their super reverb package with an Alnico. It's a mix because we were talking about this having 2 12s. So this is a ceramic and an Alnico from from the super reverb. So. Big
Night
difference.
and day,
And
night
which
and
is
day.
which is not to say that you could not also dial that in with the AHX, because everybody's going to be emphasizing different mids and different things like that. But if you want an instantaneous change, like that's pretty cool. Now here, everybody, good thing in the online world, a lot of people were talking about, and Dan and Eric Hansen also worked on this, is the Ownhammer, their GNR, not Guns N' Roses, greatly neutrally reduced. I'm going to screw it up. But it's one particular cab, like a boutique. Oh, it's an old basket weave, a 71 pre-rolla, or a copy of a pre-rolla, which is awesome. That's what I've ended up using on most of the stuff, and this is it. Okay, back to the here's the HX.
What cab was that?
CTS. That's the HX.
Which
That's the
cab
CTS.
in the HX?
It's the one that goes with the
Whatever
other
the
cab.
stock one?
The stock one. Yeah. And that was CTS, and now here's the
Omen.
pre-roll. What I have found with that particular speaker, they have so many images. It's true, right? It's got a little mid-range push to it, and the complexity in the low mids is really, really cool. I'm going to see if I can find another version of something I did. Yeah, this is the Boogie. I don't have something to compare it to, but let's see if you can hear it. You hear
bumping on the low end.
yeah, you hit the thing, and then the low end comes in. It does it specifically with that mid-boosted speaker, and I'm like, oh, it's so nice. I wish I had the other one to do it. Some of the things got wiped out here because I don't know how to use the unit quite that well yet. But I was like, oh man, I mean, the difference is
Strum a
tremendous.
chord and hold it for a minute. There's the bump.
It goes up and it rises. I was like, oh, okay, now.
But the bump comes from the amp model, not the cab, because the cab has no dynamic
It's
response over time.
It's reading. It's
Correct.
doing a different
Correct.
reading of what the amp is actually doing.
correct. It's applying a very complex
Yeah.
EQ curve to it. Yeah.
But it's quite effective, and that tone sounds nice with that guitar.
Yep.
It gets that sound.
Well, and with Les Paul, it's just oh my gosh. It's
Now, both of you guys, just that sound that you guys were playing that you had that was similar, just play together just a little bit so they can hear how it blends well. So I think you can see that, you know, now this is, I'm just got them panned a little bit to the right, but it blends well and it works really well. So the tones, which I think too is your ear, you guys tweaking it to get that sound. It would be like if you were using the amps.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons, but it's interesting how they're both, they totally different approaches, like you were saying, but they get that sound. Though I have to admit, those IRs of the speakers, it just opens it up.
It makes a real difference, which is not to say, and that's the thing that's important to say too. If you tweak with the HX and you tweak the amp and cab settings, you're going to be able to generate some of the stuff. But it is interesting that you can get that and just go pop it in and go, oh, okay. You're going to lose a block.
Yeah,
But
but most guitar players just want it now.
Right.
Okay, I'll use the block. I want that sound.
Well, and that's the other thing too. If you're going to go for heavier tones, when you begin to look at those things, there are other IRs that are, you know, orange cabinets or you know, other kind of more metal based that are designed to throw the
Yeah.
sound that way are going to react in a similar way.
And there'll be
amps.
combination of mics run into combinations of mic pre's and
And then
know.
combinations of speakers
Yeah.
because they offer that too. And Celestion has IRs and red
Yeah.
wires. And
So the impulse response is basically only speakers right now. Is that going to
Well,
expand?
it's a combination of speakers, and it's a combination of whatever happens after the cabinet. So it's what the mic picks up in the room, the location, the axis versus the
Right.
or the actual driver, the cable, the mic preamp, the A to D converter. All of that gets captured as one big impulse. And then it's effectively just a really complex EQ curve. That's really all an IR is. And when you go through an IR library, you can just scroll through tons and tons and tons and tons, especially if you have a looper and you've played a little riff, so you can focus on listening instead of having to play the same thing.
Right.
Like, oh, that's the IR. That sounds perfect with this tone.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now, is there IRs for have you seen IRs for like JBL D series and
I haven't seen them. I've looked around. Like I knew that's what you would look for. I haven't seen that yet. I was looking for Tone Tubby, the hemp cone speakers, and I could only find one in a producer pack from a while ago. I know
Yeah.
those are going to have different impacts, but I'm sure as time goes on, more and more people are going to. And a lot of people make their own.
Yeah, well,
IRs,
no,
don't they?
I can see that because there is, you know, that's another thing. Besides Celestion's basically the everybody, that's pretty much everybody's using that. Maybe Eminence is the other one because there's not much left anymore. Altex, but I remember using Altex in studios and JBLs, and they're amazing.
I'm a big Pete Thorne fan, and he has a Celestion. He puts together some beautiful tones, and he's using all Celestion stuff. I think people have generally taught, you know, it's like, is this more mix ready? Are there too many options? You know, everybody's got their thing of what might work for them.
And you can get IRs of op amps and transistors and transformers and
Yeah.
Don't tell us.
megaphones,
Don't
megaphones, and
Further down the rabbit hole. Oh
I
dear.
have a question, since I have the man here, because I've been looking at these, because although I'm very happy with the sound of this, I have a big road case that I carry around and I fly with it, and it's getting to be a pain in the butt. And it's also getting beat up as a result. So I was thinking, and I originally got this for home recording anyway, you know what I mean? I wasn't really planning on doing road stuff with it, that just evolved. But I saw a video where a guy used this just as an effect. Like he had his regular pedal board and he used all the delays and stuff like that.
absolutely.
And he ran it to his amp. He ran it into the front of his amp like a clean amp, and then he also ran it in an effects loop, and then he also ran it as a modeler. And I thought that was really appealing because, like, I could just have it on my pedal board all the time, right? I could, if I'm running a regular amp at a club or something like that, I could just use the delays and reverbs in it. But if I'm doing an in-ear gig on a road or something like that, I can do a direct kind
Sure.
of thing with it, right?
In fact, on page, I want to say 7 of the manual, there's actually a picture of HX, an illustrative HX effects in a Kemper effects loop.
There
So
you go.
I mean, it's not an all or nothing thing, and
Right,
and
right.
it's something we try to preach often.
Well, Jeff brings up a very interesting point because on there, and you can explain this, I guess, within this context, is you can choose amp and cab, you can choose amp and have an independent IR, or you can choose preamp, right?
Yep.
And so the preamp allows you to go into the
Just got an
power
effects-
section
effects loop of an amp or something.
and do that. So you've got all those options. You've got every option.
Yeah.
And
Pretty
his
much,
Kemper
right.
has what is it, 600 watts?
Yeah, it's a digital amp though, so I don't know what that.
It's a Class
translates.
D, if I'm correct.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
Class D amp, so he has 600 watts, which is plenty of volume. But if he's got, he could run your setup with that IR with the speaker and stuff, that specific impulse response, and just run that clean out of that 600 watts, and it sounds amazing.
Well, it also something I brought up with Jeff earlier is looking at Line 6 and maybe some of the other offerings of neutral powered speakers, right? Is another way to go.
Yeah, they're called FRFR.
FRFRs.
It's another approach. I don't generally recommend FRFR speakers to somebody used to playing through a real amp. There's no real reason for it unless you're used to in-ears or studio monitors, or you want to hear what the audience hears. There are certainly advantages to FRFR speakers, but that pant flap thing with a 4x12 behind your knees, it's not going to happen. And that's fine. That's the thing you're going to lose, so there's always going to be a trade-off. The good thing is that we've designed our products to make sure that you don't have to use FRFR speakers. A lot of people think, oh, if I get a modeler, I have to get a PA speaker to run it through, and that's not the case at all. In fact, we'd prefer, if people are used to playing through an amp, hook up HX effects to a real amp. You can go straight into the power amp, or if you run 4-cable method, you can easily swap out your real preamp with any of the modeled preamps with a single foot switch. And now, like, hey, I have a friend who used to play in a Metallica cover band, and they have their big Laney amps that they would gig with, and they would rent Roland JC120s for the beginning of Nothing Else Matters and One, because that's what Metallica used. And like, this is so expensive and heavy and ridiculous. We have 2 extra amps, and JC120s are heavy. And so I just use the JC120 model, the preamp, because the power amp for the Laney and the cabinet it's going to get you there certainly, and especially if you're running direct also to the front of house. Right. And one switch, it's just all it's really doing is it's swapping their Laney preamp with the JC120 model, and they still get that feel of the real drivers in the real wooden cabinet, and it's 99% of the way there. So
We're out of time.
Wow.
So we definitely have to do this
Wow.
again, because there's just way more that we have to talk about. But give real quick information on more information where to go online.
line6.com.
Okay, and check out there. Everything's up there. You can check out. You can download the manuals to take a look and see how they work. Jeffrey, what are you doing? What's coming up?
I'm playing at the Big Potato this Saturday. With
Cool.
The Loud Tizer
With
band.
Loud Tizer Group, yes.
Yeah.
Very cool.
It's gonna be
Very cool. They're
monstrous.
great. I heard them at NAMM. What are you doing?
Getting the new album to release, ready for May, and touring across the nation again. IncendioBand.com. All the information will be there.
Anything recent coming up?
We just did the first show at the Write-Off Room in Woodland Hills. That was cool. We're doing the Eclectic
It's
Music.
across the street from my house.
Maybe that's where it was. You saw me puttering around. We're doing the Eclectic Music Festival in Pasadena on April 28th, and Coffee Gallery in Pasadena in May, and then back to national shows including Colorado and Wisconsin, Chicago, East Coast, everywhere.
JeffreyMarshallMusic.com, right? CarbeandDurand.com. And Andrea, anything coming up for you that you can announce? Or is it still hush-hush?
It's still hush-hush.
But AndreaLisa.com for her.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a fantastic guitar player. We were hearing her
So,
earlier. Now,
anyway,
now she's going to get one.
Okay, so we're going to play this piece, Azúcar,
Azúcar Mocha.
and they're going to jam to it. That will take us out. Thank you again, Eric.
Thanks, guys.
And Doug, everybody here, and we will see you next week. So here, let me start your song for you guys. A 1 and a 2 and a...